7 minutes max.
Good. Thank you. So here are the key highlights from the two panels. Transitional justice can contribute, was noted in the first panel, that transitional justice can contribute to prevention and prevent the recurrence of violence by tackling exclusion and grievances that victims feel in relation to human rights abuses, and also by providing recognition and reparations. So here were examples of truth commissions that had addressed collective marginalization and inequality, examples of Colombia, Peru, and Morocco. It also noted that transitional justice processes, especially those related to institutional and constitutional reforms, can contribute to deepening democracy and democratic processes, and also rebuilding trust between citizens and state, and prevent violent conflict. And here an example drew from the spike in current coups in Africa, specifically looking at how the deepening deficit of democracy, the shrinking civic space, and lack of opportunity for citizens to engage has contributed to these undemocratic changes of government. And therefore, transitional justice processes that look at entrenching a culture of democracy and constitutionalism can address this. Other highlights include community-centered and local-level engagements as part of TJ processes are critical to tackling the social drivers of violence and violations. It was also noted that art, as an aspect of transitional justice, is an effective tool for transforming cultures of abuse, discrimination, and fostering healing, inclusion, and acknowledgement. Further, accountability for serious crime should not just be retributive. It should include rebuilding a society that accepts plurality, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. This may entail tackling discriminatory laws and upholding economic and socio-cultural rights of all persons. However, it was noted that notwithstanding the preventive role of transitional justice, the lack of implementation and the failure to enforce measures recommended by transitional justice mechanisms, for example, truth commissions, can undermine its preventive contribution. Therefore, political will is a key aspect to harnessing the effectiveness, or rather the preventive effectiveness of transitional justice. It was also noted in the first panel that media is a critical player in TJ processes, especially in popularizing and also tackling the false narratives. However, we also noted that disinformation, at times driven by the media, can contribute to violence. In the second panel, key highlights noted include that victims' participation and activism are critical in the fight against impunity, and yet victims are often lagging or seen as passive beneficiaries rather than political actors. It was also noted that consultations with victims about their needs is paramount to any justice strategies. Further, integrating victims' groups as political actors in policy-making decision and measuring success of justice initiatives is fundamental. It was recommended that political support to victims and their families from the EU and other regional and international actors must come out as a key element, particularly on issues related to enforced disappearances and political detainees. The panel also recommended that it's important that transitional justice is integrated in stabilization and peace-building approaches by the EU. And finally, it's important to note, and I think this is something that we have all discussed and agreed on, that transitional justice is a long-term process. And depending on the context, it may be piecemeal. So we have transitional justice often implemented in imperfect contexts. Therefore, any strategies of supporting TJ processes should take this into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. Lucia, what about the highlights from the role of civil society actors in crisis and conflict? Don't worry, it will come on as you speak.
Thank you. Well, we conclude that civil society is absolutely vital in monitoring all the abuses and human rights violations in countries in crisis. Some of us, human rights defenders, we are doing our job in autocratic regimes where international relations are very important. Some of the conclusions were that international justice system, like universal jurisdiction, should be start operating in the world in a lot of contexts. A second thing is that the psychological and physical impact of human rights defenders when we saw all the day these atrocities. And sometimes we defend victims, but who defends human rights defenders? That's like a big question. And you ask in the morning, who protects the workers of the NGOs? So I think this is like a question that are in the air. I mean, we have some strategies to protect us physically, but sometimes not psychologically. So we have this like we should have this in mind. Third, give me a second because I have a lot of notes. Okay. We talk about also the lack of access to political peace processes of women's. And we start to talk about women's human rights defenders. And it is very curious because it has happened the same, for example, in Colombia and in Libya, that the women's was not contemplated in the peace processes. So that's very important, and that's very like a focus to put when we are talking about peace constructions and all these things. Other thing is the short-term funding, that we don't have like mentorship programs or in a long term. So that's really important to reinforce the human rights defenders and women human rights defenders particularly. Another thing is that in our countries, there are like a lot of laws, sometimes are good laws and good policies, but they are not implementing. They just exist, but never implementing. And also laws that protect human rights defenders. But in another hand, there are laws that put in risk not just human rights defenders, but NGOs, like the registrations, laws that like cut the capability of NGOs to receive financial of the international fundings or donors of international cooperation. Another thing that we talk is accountability and the necessity of intersectionality focus, because it is not the same being a human rights defender that being a woman human rights defender or an indigenous people that defends human rights, or if you are a LGBT community, a person who defends human rights, it is not the same. So we have to raising awareness about these intersectionalities and raising awareness in the training of judges, of prosecutors, of gender and capacity building of see these intersectionalities. Finally, I want to say that we conclude another things like the renewal of a fact-finding missions or independence bodies that document and report situations in countries that are in autocratic or in conflict areas, that is very useful. And I want to say something that make me like think about this today's conversation regarding to feminism and women human rights defenders and all the talk that we have, that it is difficult to have these discussions about feminism in a context of war, militarization, and patriarchal public policies. So the role of international community should be imposed like a different strategy and disruptive strategies that can start to fight back the patriarchal strategies that we see that it doesn't work. So I was thinking in that when I was doing the resume for today. And finally, I just want to mention that the situation of Nicaragua and Vilma Núñez, that we saw the video this morning, and send all my solidarity to her and to the human rights defenders in Nicaragua, because it is a situation that it is the book of text of authoritarianism. So I will finish with that and sending my solidarity to Vilma.
Thank you very much. So, Alice, what about the thread on international accountability mechanisms?
Yes, it's very difficult to summarize the very rich discussions around the international accountability mechanisms and the variety of the interventions of panelists that were coming from many different situations and institutions, but here are some common threads to highlight. So first, the issue of complementarity of the different level of justice, which is central to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, means that international mechanisms are part of a wider global justice system, which includes national, regional, and international actors. They cannot function in isolation and need to cooperate with all of these actors. As a reminder, it is the primary responsibility of states to provide justice for international crimes. Governments play a key role in the fight against impunity, also by providing support and resources for accountability mechanisms, and by prosecuting those crimes domestically, including through the practice of universal jurisdiction, which we talked about, for which they meet the same challenges as the international mechanism, which means lack of resources, the need for cooperation, and the specialization of staff. So all speakers also recognized the central role civil society organization and human rights defenders play in the right functioning of these international justice efforts, and more broadly to ensure victims' access to justice. It was underlined by all speakers that those actors are central in responding to crimes, from documentation, participation in proceedings, understanding of victim perspective, and situational awareness, especially where there's no access for the accountability mechanism to the crime scenes. These actors, so civil society and human rights defenders, are also key in ensuring public awareness for justice efforts and continued engagement with courts and advocacy for the victims. They need to be seen as equal partners in their relationship with the mechanisms. It is necessary to ensure real engagement and meaningful victim participation in all accountability efforts. And on that, we had good example of partnership with civil society organization from, for instance, the IIMM in Myanmar, the IIIM in Syria, and the EU Genocide Network. During the discussion, we also highlight some common challenges. So the first one is how to have a victim-centered approach to justice. So this includes the matters of participation, victim and witness protections, reparation, and medical and psychological support. There is the need for protective measures in the countries where the crime were committed, but also in EU countries. We also talked about the question of the engagement with civil society organizations and human rights defenders. Any justice effort needs to have a clear strategy in ensuring that civil society can engage with justice work in a safe and secure way. It is the responsibility of states and mechanisms to stand up and protect those at risk. We also talked about challenges related to state cooperation. To be effective, justice efforts depend on state, which means providing access to crime scene, to victims, to witnesses, to evidence, the matter of enforcement, and of course the question of protection. This is all linked to political will. We talked also about the issue of selectivity, which is often linked to the lack of resources, and the issue of political will, which leads to insufficient investment in justice efforts. Different speakers underlined the selective attention of the international community and the selectivity in implementation of the global justice system. This is problematic because even if situations differ, the different interventions showed that there are common issues and threats that lead to impunity in different places. For instance, the lack of capacity to investigate and prosecute, the lack of resources, or the instrumentalization of justice. We talked about double standards and how different responses to justice needs by international community and states, including the European Union, can make victims feel like they are in competition with each other. We also talked about the challenge of the long timeline of justice and the issue of a sustainable support to justice efforts. For instance, in terms of evidence collection, lots of efforts are done for collecting material, but we don't know when and where they will be used, because justice takes time. All these challenges can lead to frustration, uncertainty related to the delivery of an effective justice. But we also highlight some good practices and have some recommendations that were discussed. So as I said before, states have the primary responsibility of responding to international crimes. So speakers highlighted that it is key to build domestic capacities. Strengthening domestic system will strengthen standards for accountability worldwide. We talked about the need for ratification of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and the implementation of the Rome Statute and international humanitarian law in national legislation. We talked about the need to strengthen the International Criminal Court, including through the provision of appropriate resources and financial support, especially when justice cannot be done at the local level. Importantly, we also talked about the need to strengthen, to support, and to protect human rights defender victims group and civil society organization in the long term. Because considering how justice efforts depends on victims group and civil society, it is necessary to have a strategic vision of their role in relation to justice efforts and truly define these organizations as equal partners with ownership of the cases and the evidence that they collect, etc. There is also the need to build capacity of these groups to participate in the justice system meaningfully. We also talked about the question of gender in justice efforts and the need to have a gender lens integrated from the start in different investigation and prosecution strategies. We also shared some good practices in communication. Outreach activities should be tailored to situations and communities to make the mandate of the accountability mechanism understood and ensure that they can have real interaction with the affected community. There is a need for better communication about investigation and prosecution to respect the victim's right to be informed. States, including the EU, should ensure, finally, states, including the EU, should ensure consistent political will and sustainability of accountability effort across all situations. And on that, I just want to borrow the words from Shawan Jabarin from Al-Haq in Palestine that said, "We should look at the reaction to the Ukraine expanded conflict as an opportunity to push international actors, including the EU, to do this in other situations. Civil society has the role to say that double standards are an issue. States need to address this issue in a clear way."
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you for your contributions. It's never an easy task to be a rapporteur, so we're very grateful for fulfilling the role. Thanks very much. And I'm now going to invite the representatives of our three hosting organizations to deliver their concluding remarks, starting with Chiara Adamo, who's the Director for Human Development, Governance and Peace at the European Commission. Chiara, please.
So I understand you have been in two very intense days discussion, so I just want to keep these conclusions short also because our three rapporteurs really did the job for us in an excellent way. But just allow me to thank you all for your engagement, your participation, your insights. I believe this is the first forum after a couple of years where we were obliged to be online. And the real added value of this forum is that it provides for so many opportunities for informal exchanges, for networking, for peer learning among you and between NGOs, activists, and ourselves in the institution. So I was really happy that after 2 years we were able to reconvene again in this physical format. We heard your main conclusions and findings on the 3 pillars, and I believe they can all be shared, and we will follow up on those. Maybe just a few lines from our side. If I take Pillar 1, transitional justice, well, we learned, of course, that criminal accountability is not the whole story to ensure reparation for victims. We learned that we need to take really a comprehensive approach to transitional justice. We need to take gender lenses. We need to make sure really that also we bring women at the negotiation table. And we learned that we need to have a balanced approach. Again, a good mix of operational bilateral support, support to reparation programs, institutional reforms, and also bring this nexus with the humanitarian aid interventions. The ICC deputy can mention that the deputy prosecutor can mention that not all cases can be prosecuted. There is a need for prioritization. But there is a right for all to be acknowledged, to be heard. And I would say also we need to look more into informal justice processes, into truth-seeking processes, because also this can go a long way to, for victims and survivors to regain their dignity, and for communities to really be at peace. On Pillar 2, I was so humbled this morning to be part of this plenary, and we had a number of human rights defenders. One of them from Memorial mentioned one sentence, and I think it said it all. He said, "This is a marathon. We are in there for the long term. You need to be very patient." And we just heard it again from the rapporteur, justice takes time. So it requires some resilience. It requires really that also we are there for you for the long term. So this is really well taken. Also, we mentioned the need for flexibility in the arsenal of the possibility of the tools that we have to support and prevention. The real need also in this context to look at prevention, to enable civic spaces, to be able to swiftly identify also signs, warning signs of deterioration of this space, so that we can help you, help yourself and organizations on the ground. We hope that this proposal for a global impunity observatory as a network of specialized NGOs working on accountability and also giving the really the possibility on the ground to support your efforts will be of help. And finally, on Pillar 3, I think discussions underscore the need, of course, to continue our steadfast support to the multilateral rules-based system, and I'm sure Luisa will say more about it. Also at the EU level, we need to be better equipped. For instance, Eurojust, our EU agency for coordinating judicial cooperation, has now received the mandate to collect, analyze, and preserve evidence to support member state actions to combat genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. So we will also provide them with additional means to foster judicial cooperation in addressing core international crimes under national jurisdiction within the European Union. And I also listened carefully to what one of you just said now about the need to reinforce and strengthen domestic judicial systems. I mean, that's where it starts. It's a multi-layered, multi-level system. So we are in there strongly. I think we are prioritizing in at least 54 countries judicial strengthening. So really to work to support judicial systems in many regions of the world. So this is really my last takeaway. Serious violations of human rights, in a way they unite us because they occur everywhere. They occur in Europe, they occur outside Europe. So we are in it together. We need to continue to learn from each other, share, and be able to have open, frank discussions and support each other to strive really for more freedom and justice for all citizens in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you. I would now like to invite Luisa Rager, who is Head of Division for Human Rights at the European External Action Service.
Thank you very much. And thank you to my two co-organizers, so IMPA and HRDN. But first of all, thank you to you all. We have been traveling from all over the world to come here and to share your testimonies with us. And it is with that we develop our policies. So we really need to hear from you to make sure that what we do helps you and doesn't hinder your cause, but helps your cause. And therefore, this fora for us is not a fora for a discussion, is a fora for policy formulation. Let me start by saying that ahead of the forum, we had a lengthy discussion on what the topic should be. And I think that in the end, we decided the right topic. As the High Representative said yesterday, the world as we knew it 3 years ago, when we last met in person, is a very different world from the world of today. We have crises in every continent. We have difficult situations at our doorstep, but we have difficult situations in every region from where you all come from. So that calls for us to adapt the way we work in supporting civil society, in supporting human rights defenders. And of course, it calls for you also to adapt the way you work, because we are working in a different setting, and we need to adapt the way we work, the way we ensure that the restrictions of unlawful legislation is put in place, the way we address crimes and grave human rights violations, and ultimately, we need to ensure that all perpetrators are brought to justice. I would like to underline one point that for me is very important. We are really not focusing on one crisis or another crisis. We are focusing on all crises. And there is not the crisis of today and the crisis of yesterday. We are focusing on all crises, and we are in for the long term. We are in supporting civil society and human rights defenders wherever you are, and for the long term. And I really want to stress that, because I've heard during the 2 days a little bit of discomfort with some situations in one or the other country. Be reassured that we pay attention to every country situation, and we really want to do the best to support civil society and human rights defenders. Like Chiara, I would like to give a quick snapshot of the 3 pillars. And from different perspectives, because we all have a different reading on what we hear. And of course, I don't aim at having a comprehensive readout that the rapporteur did. That was brilliant. And really, I'm impressed by what I've heard. It's been a fantastic summary. This is not what I am. What I am is just to give what has resonated and what will then be elaborated further when we receive the full report, because this gathering results in full report that are recommendations for us, for the institutions. So first of all, on Pillar 1, on preventing impunity, the importance of addressing the grievances of the past, and only by addressing grievances of the past we can really ensure that there is peace. A lot of focus was given on victims and survivors as being part of the process, victim-centered policies, survivors to be part of the discussions and their concerns to be taken into account throughout the process. Focus on challenges of gathering evidence, of storing the evidence, and also of ensuring that the evidence respects the court admissibility standards. Here it was quite interesting to see how this is slightly different from one country situation to the other. Some may be in the position to gather the evidence through one technology. Some others would have more difficulties in transferring the technology, the evidence, rather than in gathering the evidence. A message that we heard throughout is implementation, the importance of ensuring that recommendation of transitional justice process, recommendations from a Truth Commission, that those would be implemented. And this is a very fair point. Recommendations without implementations are of very limited use. Now, when I move to the Pillar 2 of civil society, strong call to involve human rights defenders and civil society, and in particular women human rights defenders, in peace mediation efforts, in transitional justice processes, and this is something on which we are working very hard to increase the role of civil society and to increase a seat at the table for women peace mediator, for instance. So this is something that is really top of our agenda, and progress is made, maybe not as quickly as it should, but progress has been made. Here again, the discussion on digital technologies was quite interesting, and how technologies can serve to document violations and war crimes, but at the same time, how technologies can be used against the human rights defenders, and the need to ensure secure communication, secure storage of evidence. The point that also Chiara made about psychosocial impact of the conflict, and who is there to help the human rights defenders that are there to help the society. So this is something on which we will be focusing much more in the months and years to come. Specific vulnerabilities of certain human rights defenders, in particular women, have been discussed in what was a panel discussing really women human rights defenders in situation of conflict and crisis, and in particular sexual and gender-based violence, and the fact that not all cases are not necessarily reported, are underreported because there is a fear to speak out. This is something on which we are really working very much. We are conscious of that. There are international reports that focus very much on this evidence in war crisis situations. I would like, on the implementation, I would like to inform you also of one recent announcement at the External Action Service. It has been mentioned in some of the discussions that one of our policies, which is sanctions, can have a deterrent effect or a negative effect for the society on the ground. While in that panel I argued that, of course, we take every precaution, and our sanctions are targeted sanctions, and we aim at not affecting the population. I would also like to inform you that we have the External Action Service has recently announced that there will be a special envoy has been nominated on the implementation of the sanctions. This is David O'Sullivan, and I'm pleased to say my former boss. And now two key issues as well that have been brought to our attention: the specific role of lawyers that are not civil society, not human rights defenders. We include lawyers under the category of human rights defenders, but at the same time, I take the point that lawyers have a different work to do and different specificities, and I take the point that we should look at lawyers in this circumstance under a different lens. But I would still underline that the human rights protection mechanism that we have in place do apply to lawyers as well. And the other message that I retain from this discussion is human rights defenders, the new generation. Some of you have mentioned now we need to look at the next generation of human rights defenders. I don't see the age here that requires the next generation, but I take the point that in some conflicts where human rights defenders had to leave the country and you are operating from exile and you have a limited contract with your country, we need to start thinking about who does the work in the future. Now, on the international accountability mechanism pillar, of course, the message was there is no peace without justice. That was a recurrent message in the different pillars. Again, the message that the victims should be part of the discussion, and in particular on restorative justice as well. I retained the point that the capacity of civil society and the role of civil society should be clearly defined in the justice processes. It's not always very clear where civil society stands. A lot of discussion as well on adequate resources, but not only adequate resources for civil society in crisis and conflict, operating in crisis or conflict, but also about resources for accountability mechanisms and also for institutions that perform this role. And we have heard it from Mr. and also Mrs. Khan yesterday, that the resources available to the ICC, despite the increase of budget that has recently been allocated from the European Union, are still limited for the scope of their activities. Universal jurisdiction has come out as a very strong call for a better and wider use of universal jurisdiction. This is, of course, not a comprehensive summary on my side. We'll be looking at the recommendations, and really we will use them as our tools to develop our policies. When I say develop our policies, I would still want to remind everybody that we have a strong policy framework to protect human rights defenders, to promote civil society and increase the capacity of civil society. We have human rights defenders guidelines that our delegations on the ground use on a daily basis. We have the financial instruments that we make at disposal in our actions, and we use all our political tools to support human rights defenders. Already mentioned several times, announced yesterday by the High Representative, the Impunity Observatory is really something that will be a game changer once it is set up. So I invite you all to look at this initiative very carefully. We have given the budget that it requires, and you will be key actors in this endeavor. So please have a close look at that. And also, I would like to underline that it's not us here in headquarters that are talking to you, but is our network of delegation. We have over 140 offices around the world, and these are the people that know the situation best. And I would really invite all of you, if you are not in contact with our offices, to make contact with our office and make sure that the work is done together. In concluding, let me just say that the challenges that we are facing are very important, and the situation is not moving towards a better situation, but we are in a situation, as I said at the beginning, that is worse than the situation that we had 3 years ago in terms of conflict, of crisis around the world. And in that circumstance, we need to work together. We need the institution, the states, civil society, human rights defenders to stand together. This is the only way we can go forward in our road to accountability. This is the only way we can succeed. And my last word, today is not the beginning of a cooperation and the end of a cooperation. Today is the continuation of a cooperation. And I really invite you all to liaise with us. You know us. My entire team was here for the 2 days. And so you have met all of us, but also liaise with our delegations. Our door is open. We count on you, and you can count on us to really move towards a better situation. Thank you very much, and I would like just to say thank you to all my colleagues that have been working flat hours to prepare this.
Thank you, Luisa. And I'd like to now ask you to welcome our last concluding speech from Jimena Reyes, who's the Director for the Americas of the International Federation for Human Rights. And she'll be speaking on behalf of the Human Rights Democracy Network.
Yes.
Aren't you? Yes.
Exactly. Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to sit next to you because
Absolutely.
It often happens to me. This kind of podium, if you want to see my face, don't work. So I'll take a seat.
Please have a seat. Wherever.
Even closer. Okay. Well, time to close these 2 days of intense discussions. This annual event that is organized this year on Stop Impunity, the Road to Accountability and Justice is a partnership. My colleagues mentioned it. A partnership between the External Service Action and it has changed names, I'm going to read, the European Commission's Directorate General for International Partnership, and HRDN. HRDN, it's maybe of the 3, the entity that you know less. It is a network of 60 NGOs that work in Brussels on human rights and democracy. Well, like many of those concluding events, I am not going to try to summarize the richness of the discussions. So I just would like to share with you 4 of my main takes that I will bring back home and also back to my NGO that is part of HRDN, that's FIDH. So the first one is that the importance of putting victims at the center of the road of accountability, and many of you have mentioned this. Justice processes should not be understood as having an exclusive focus on prosecuting and punishing the perpetrators. Justice is also about recognizing the dignity of victims, included but not only through reparation, be it at the ICC, at the ad hoc tribunals, before the universal jurisdiction, national courts, in the context of the investigative UN mechanism. And many participants mentioned this, including the ICC deputy prosecutor, that underlined the importance of ensuring voices of victims are heard and not disempowering or re-victimizing them in the process of justice. And this is the job of all of us to make sure this happens. Also, in the context of the panel dedicated to sexual and gender-based crimes, we were reminded that the key element to a survivor-centered approach in accountability processes are, in addition to access to justice, the provision of medical, psychological, social, and economic support for victims. Colombia was a very good example of victims being put at the center of transitional justice system. Oscar Parra from the HEP reminded us that of the restorative nature of the special jurisdiction for peace and within the process, this moment where the victims can answer back to what the perpetrators have said during the process of the HEP, of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. But at the same time, Adriana from Humanas, talking about Colombia, also explained how hard it was and it had been to include within the peace process the issue of sexual and gender-based violence in a peace process that was negotiated only by men. But they managed, and now they're trying to implement those points. So that's my first take. My second take is that we need a multidimensional and interrelated approach in the fight against impunity. So you have, as always in life, several options. You can see the glass half empty and consider that there is a fragmentation of the process of justice with the ICC, the ad hoc tribunals, the national mechanism, the national and regional tribunals. But we also heard recommendations urging all those actors to coordinate and collaborate better. And this is one of the first recommendations that I also take that we will be pushing for the EU, is to continue support to keep the wheel turning in this multidimensional fight against impunity. This is important, and we need allies, and we know, for example, for the ICC, it was shown with Trump, but it is shown in a less obvious way with Biden, that the US is not a great supporter of the ICC. Another recommendation for the EU, but also for artists that I will bring to my NGO and the members of FIDH, is the interest and important that it would be to widen the use of universal jurisdiction in the global south, but also to make it more concrete in many European countries. This would be a great improvement for the possibility of victims of international crime to access justice. Then my third take is that it's a take, and it's a questioning, is the lack of political will and the lack of the independence of the judiciary as the main issue. I mean, if we are trying to work strategies on the fight against impunity, it's because in many countries at the national level, there is no political will to move forward towards access to justice for international crimes, and because when you have the chance of having a judiciary, it is not independent enough to tackle subjects so sensitive of international crimes that are very often committed by authorities, militaries, or organized crimes. So big important actors. With that respect, well, we need to continue looking for new strategies to think out of the box. I thought I acknowledge the fact that during the event, you know, sometimes you attend events where, especially when it's organized also by institutions, international institutions, where it's all about best practices, and you feel like the world is going fine. That was not the case here. Yes, we spoke about best practices, but we also acknowledged the challenges that we face, and we heard Mr. Borrell saying that those last 3 years, things have worsened. We heard that there is an increase in polarization of the world, that besides democratization, you have authoritarianization. I like that word, that sadly it's indeed happening. And we also heard testimonies from countries where the prospect of justice seems far away. Burundi, Nicaragua, Algeria, Palestine, and Sahel, and many others. So really, I also take this commitment of you all to continue the fight. And we also heard some innovative strategies to force national authorities to open access to justice for victims of international crime. For example, using art to do name and shaming. For example, in the Philippines, using international litigation to access to the money stolen by the dictator and then redistributed to victims. Another recommendation to the EU in that sense is, well, the EU engage in dialogue with everyone, including challenging regime. And we know it's tricky, but we're from civil society to also mention those things. It's really important not to be instrumentalized by propaganda of those regimes when engaging in this dialogue. And also the elephant in the room of impunity and authoritative regime is the support of China and Russia to those regimes. And that's also something that we collectively have to work on. Well, we hope that this event brought some hopes to human rights defenders from countries that are in the darkest part of the tunnel. And to them, I want to say that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and history has shown it. So let's work together to access justice. And this brings me to my last point, something that I take, and that is the reason why I'm working on human rights for the last 20 years. It's the solidity, the generosity, the intelligence, the audacity of the human rights movements. And so it was really wonderful also to be listening to all the stories of all of you, and suffering also, but strategies also. So for that, thank you. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Jimena, and indeed, thank you for your message of hope at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our today's conference, but before I let you go, I still have a couple of practical points to make. I mentioned earlier on the fact that several of you have had their flights cancelled, unfortunately, due to a general strike in Belgium tomorrow. Now, don't worry, you will receive tonight from the organizers an email with all the information about tomorrow and the coming days, your new flight, about accommodation, about the meals, about the surprise tour of Brussels that I mentioned earlier on this morning. So don't worry, you are taken care of. There are people working in the background to make sure that you are actually not left to your own devices. So you will receive an email tonight. In case you don't receive an email, I'm talking tonight, not in the coming 2 hours, okay? So give it a bit of time. But if you don't receive that email, you can write an email to the support address that you have been receiving all the information from since the beginning. So normally, don't worry, you will be taken care of, and we wanted to make sure you were reassured on that particular front. Another point, if you have been taking photographs or videos throughout the 2 days, please keep them to yourselves. Don't spread them on social networks and so on unless they are of yourself. Just think of the other participants' privacy and sometimes difficult situations. So don't share. I mean, you would mean well, but think of their right to privacy and don't spread photographs and videos on social networks. That would be very considerate of you. That's it. So thanks again for all your contributions, for your participation, very active participation. I'd like indeed to thank the organizers, the interpreters who have also helped us, and the tech team who have taken us through these 2 days. And I think all these people deserve a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, have a very safe trip home wherever you are going, and some of you are embarking on long trips. So safe trip home, a nice rest of the day, and that's it from us. Bye-bye.